Recently, a buddy of mine had this crazy build idea. He wanted to deal almost all of his damage with just a relic. For those who don't know, relics are meant to be your healing items in Remnant 2, so dealing damage with them is usually out of the question. Well, it turns out you can actually deal some amazing damage with just a relic and a bit of shenanigans. We set off on Narude to test this, and fortunately it was on Apocalypse and still worked. It revolves around this relic called the Tormented Heart. It has faster use speed and explodes in a wide radius around the user, dealing damage to enemies and stealing their life for your own. Problem is, you only get 10 of them and then they're out. But pair this with the Invader skill Reboot and you can use all your relics and then gain them all back in an instant. I'm going to go over the full build here, but before I do, I'll explain the premise so the video makes more sense. We use rings and amulets to buff skill cooldown and explosion damage. This makes the relic deal not amazing damage, but enough to be usable in even Apocalypse. Then we make sure to have good consumable use speed so the relic can be eaten quickly. Now add on Reboot. This Invader skill creates a backup of your character. All your ammo, health, stamina, and relic charges will be stored on a decoy essentially. This happens when you press the skill. You have about 30 seconds to do what you need to do. If the timer runs out, you lose everything. If you press the skill again before that happens, you actually get all your stuff your decoy or backup had. This allows you to use the skill, eat all 10 of your relics, and then use it again to get all relics back. Due to our ridiculous skill cooldown, we can loop this every 11 seconds, allowing for even bosses to be killed by your relic alone. I call this the Big Splooter build, and here's how you can make it yourself. Your prime class will be Invader. This offers a variety of things, but the two we need in particular are the Prime perk and Override. The Prime perk makes it so that you deal 15% more damage to any enemy not targeting you, which basically means if an enemy is fighting your decoy, you get more damage, and a bit more lifesteal as well. Then the Override perk reduces how often enemies target you and creates a decoy after you take a relic. You're going to need to take a relic and then dodge or slide for the decoy to spawn. This combo allows us to use all 10 of our relics over and over while creating decoys that help you survive longer and grant a good boost in damage. These red assistants will last 5 seconds, which in the heat of battle is longer than you think. For the skill, you need Reboot. This is actually one of the worst skills in the game as it doesn't have nearly as many uses as other skills, except in situations like this. It's going to create a backup of yourself, allowing you to use your relics and ammo. Use the skill again to get all that stuff back, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Additionally, you gain 15% movement speed and 10% damage reduction while in this state, which is very useful for just surviving in the game. Now, you might notice it says 11-second cooldown right there. No, that's not the normal cooldown for the skill, by far. I currently have 80% skill cooldown reduction, allowing me to use this relic build constantly. Be aware, I don't know if this is a bug or just a mechanic of the game, but it's possible that you will have this exact gear and it will take you down to 60%. To fix it, you need to take a concoction and then retake the skill cooldown concoction. I'll talk about that later, but it seems entering and exiting the game can mess with the stats, so this will help you fix that. For your subclass, you want Medic. This offers a 25% bump to all damage, which affects the relic, and increases the relic use speed, which is really all we're doing, so we need that. Also, this class lets you heal your teammates while you deal damage with the relic explosion. Because it lifesteals, it's going to fully heal everyone on your team every time you deal damage with the relic. It's really hilarious and actually useful, surprisingly. For your skill, you want Redemption. This grants an easy way to heal you and the team, as well as res your friends if they get downed. Now, technically, I think the shield heal is better if you're playing in solo, but either of them get a big cooldown reduction, making both usable. For the armor, I can't take credit for this, as my buddy pretty much created the perfect look here. Fey Royal Head Cover, Void Carapace, Fey Royal Greaves, and Dendroid Grips, making you look dark and mysterious like the Nightweaver, which the heart does resemble. It's possible the Void Carapace is only available to those who pre-ordered the game or got the large package upon purchase, so just be aware of that. Of course, the relic is the biggest part of the build, and you'll need the Tormented Heart. Not an easy guy to get, but very cool to build around. You get faster use speed, which helps eat the relic before our skill timer runs out. You deal explosive damage and lifesteal. This lets you fully heal every single time you take a relic and deal good damage. Funnily enough, the stagger is actually insane from this explosion. Adds or mob-like enemies will always be knocked back, and even some of the bosses can be pushed back if you take it enough. No, this is not going to be a build that deals 10,000 damage at a time, but it is very usable. As for the fragments, I ran consumable speed, skill cooldown, and staggered damage. You can tell we're going for really fast relic usage, and the skill cooldown keeps our cooldown at 80%, making it less of a waiting game. As for the stagger damage, I'm not necessarily sure if it's the best option, but it does feel great to jolt back all the enemies. While it is possible to use only the Relic to beat the game, I do think having some good weapons to back you up is a great idea, especially since Apocalypse is already hard enough. The Chicago Typewriter will be your main weapon as it can crit very well and has a larger magazine. Use Helix as the mod because it's the best explosion-based one that has good crit and damage. Then throw on the Bandit Mutator so that you don't ever need to reload the gun, or at least not quite as often. Just feels smoother in between Relic phases. For your melee, I ran with the Hero Sword as it can get a ranged attack in and looks pretty solid with the build. Equip Darvish on it so you get more damage from activating skills. As you can see, I didn't really use this, but it probably is your best option when you want it. Finally, we have the Sidarm, which you'll want to use the MP60R or the Silverback Model 500. The Silverback will offer good stagger and range, while the SMG has better crit. I mainly had the SMG on because we tested this against the Frog Boss on Narude, and his orbs need an automatic weapon, or you're pretty much just dead. Space Crabs is a great mod on this, as all the crabs explode working with our gear and being usable very often. We're also running feedback as the mutator as it generates mods much more often. All said and done, you have an arsenal that gives you decent crit and explosive mods. For when your relic isn't active, you deal a bit more than just chip damage. Then of course we have the Amulet Rings, which is basically how the relic is usable in the first place. Detonation Trigger increases explosive damage by 25% and applies burning to targets, making all explosions bombs of massive proportion. Burden of the Rebel reduces skill cooldowns by 15%, but sadly reduces relic use speed by 25%. We have been taking a lot of stuff to mitigate this downside, so it basically isn't even there, and our relic still gets eaten pretty quickly. Burden of the Stargazer reduces skill cooldowns by 15%, but makes skills cost 15% of your health. This grants cooldown, and since we are lifestealing with the relic, the health loss basically doesn't even exist. You're just going to heal back up anyway. Burden of the Gambler disables weak spots, but increases crit chance by 10% and crit damage by 20%. Without this, you don't have enough damage. I was able to see over 1,000 crit damage quite often because of this ring alone, and it doesn't hurt the build as the Relic Explosion cannot deal weak spot damage. Lastly, we have the Black Pawn Stamp, which reduces cooldowns of skills by 10%. If you can't tell, we mainly went for skill cooldown because otherwise you can't use your skill often enough to get the relics back. Then added in some explosion damage bonuses, so it's actually possible to do this for bosses. Yes, even in Apocalypse difficulty. Much better for ad clear, I'm not gonna lie, as it's actually good at that, but still able to beat bosses if you have enough patience. Of course, traits are always important, but for this build, they're extremely important, as without specific ones, you will not do great at all. Fortify increases armor by a lot, which paired with our reboot skill makes us tanky enough to survive hits and heal through them. Although bosses can usually still kill you with hits, so just watch out for those. Only 2 points in strong back because this gives us a medium dodge. Without it, you have a heavy one, which is a big no-no. Triage makes healing much more efficient, working with our relic to fully heal us. Untouchable makes it easier to dodge, and let me tell you, it really helps. Vigor for a bit more health, Endurance for a bit more stamina, only 8 points into Spirit as you want mods back but need to take out some for strong back, and mods are only back up anyway. Expertise for 20% more cooldown, which is very important. I somehow forgot to use this when running the build for footage the other day, a really brain dead moment because it's a huge bonus to skill cooldown. Amplitude allows the relic to deal damage from much further away. Without this, you need to stand too close to enemies to not die. Finally, we have Glutton, so you can have a faster relic use speed even though our ring hurts that. I'd highly recommend this trait in particular since again, the relic is mainly what we will be using for the entire game. The last item that you're going to need is Xenoplasm Concoctions. They offer a 10% skill cooldown for 60 minutes, which gets us to 80% skill cooldown. Seriously, 11 seconds for the reboot skill is absolutely insane and will make the run way more fun than if you have, say, even a 22-second cooldown, which is still better than it normally is. And that's pretty much it, guys. Me and my buddy used this and actually a weaker version of this to beat an entire adventure mode on Apocalypse. We ran through Narud and defeated the Hatchery, Ghost, and Slug or Frog boss. Took a couple of tries for the Ghost and Frog, but the Hatchery was really easy, as you can stagger everything in the room with just the use of your relics. No, this is obviously not the best, most OP build in Remnant 2, but it is really fun, and I'd highly recommend trying it out. Heck, use it on lower difficulties, and it might actually be really good. Apocalypse, it's usable, but only if you're decent at the game. Hopefully you enjoyed this splooter build, and do try it out. Just using the reboot skill with this relic makes the entire thing work, and then we did a few tweaks to make it as efficient as possible. Get out there and show those bosses what an absolutely insane gamer can do, and I'll catch you next time.